In the late 19th century, right in the heart of London, there lived an exceptionally talented artist named Basil Hallward. People in the city knew him for his remarkable skill in capturing beauty on canvas. He had a reputation for turning everyday subjects into extraordinary pieces of art. But now, he was on the verge of creating his greatest work. One day, a young man named Dorian Gray walked into Basil's studio. Dorian was the epitome of youth and beauty, with a face that seemed to radiate an otherworldly charm. His dark, shiny hair framed his striking features, and his eyes held a sparkle of innocence that was captivating and rare. Basil was immediately taken by Dorian's looks. He saw in Dorian the perfect inspiration, someone who could take his art to new heights. He couldn't resist the urge to paint this young man and capture his beauty on canvas forever. As Basil worked tirelessly on the portrait, he and Dorian became close friends with each brushstroke. Basil's admiration for Dorian's beauty deepened, and he found himself falling in love with the young man. He poured all his passion and adoration into the painting. One evening, Basil introduced Dorian to his good friend, Lord Henry Wotton. Lord Henry was known for his clever wit and cynical outlook on life. He believed in pursuing pleasure and beauty above all else, and he took a keen interest in Dorian. Lord Henry's influence on Dorian was significant. He encouraged Dorian to embrace a life of hedonism, to seek beauty and pleasure without worrying about moral consequences. Dorian, still impressionable and captivated by his own portrait, was seduced by Lord Henry's philosophy. So, in the heart of London, within the dimly lit studio, a portrait was created, and the seeds of a moral and psychological drama were planted. Little did they know that this portrait, this work of art, would become the embodiment of their desires and their sins. One evening, while Basil Hallward diligently worked on the portrait, Dorian was overwhelmed by a profound melancholy. He realized that his portrait would forever capture his youthful allure, while he, in the natural course of life, would age and fade. In a moment of deep yearning, he made a wish that would come to redefine the trajectory of his existence. Dorian wished that he could remain perpetually young and beautiful, just as he appeared in the portrait. He wished for the portrait to bear the weight of time and experience, sparing him from the inevitable toll of years. It was a fleeting, desperate thought, but it carried a power beyond his imagination. To Dorian's astonishment, it seemed as though his wish had been granted. The portrait remained eternally youthful and untouched by the passage of time, while he retained his youthful appearance. It was as if he had struck an unholy bargain, though he was yet unaware of the full implications of his wish. As weeks turned into months, Dorian Gray's life took a darker, more decadent turn. He plunged headfirst into a world of hedonism and debauchery. Guided by Lord Henry's cynical philosophy, he pursued every pleasure imaginable, heedless of the moral consequences. Meanwhile, the portrait in the hidden studio underwent a macabre transformation. It bore the scars of Dorian's sins, aging and deteriorating with each moral transgression. It became a grotesque reflection of his inner corruption. concealed from the world's prying eyes. While Dorian's reputation as a charming and beautiful young man continued to soar, he was becoming a subject of scandal and gossip among London's elite. Whispers of his reckless behavior and indifference to consequences circulated among his friends and acquaintances. Unbeknownst to the world, the portrait concealed in the attic bore the true cost of Dorian's choices. It aged, it decayed, and it served as a chilling mirror of the darkness festering within him. As days turn into months, Dorian's portrait, painted by Basil Hallward, changes significantly. The portrait begins to show signs of aging and decay, bearing the scars of Dorian's sinful lifestyle. Meanwhile, Dorian himself remains untouched by time, retaining his youthful appearance. Dorian immerses himself in a world of decadence and recklessness. He becomes known for his captivating looks and charm, but also for his disregard for the consequences of his actions. He lives each day as if it's an opportunity for something exquisite. Each immoral act, each indulgence, leaves a mark on the painting, while Dorian remains seemingly unaffected. The chapter also introduces us to Dorian's romantic involvement with an actress named Sybil Vane. Dorian is initially infatuated with Sybil's beauty and her talent as an actress. However, when her acting starts to suffer because of her love for him, Dorian cruelly breaks off their engagement. Sybil's despair and eventual suicide do little to stir Dorian's emotions. His indifference to her tragic fate shows just how far he has descended into moral decay. In Chapter 4, the consequences of Dorian Gray's choices become even more profound, leading to heartbreak and tragedy. His pursuit of pleasure and beauty without regard for morality takes a dark turn, and the novel's moral and psychological drama intensifies. Dorian's obsession with his portrait in the attic continues to grow. He becomes increasingly entranced by the fact that his physical appearance remains youthful and unblemished, while the portrait reflects his true moral decay. Basil Hallward, the artist who painted the portrait, begins to suspect that something is amiss with Dorian. He notices disturbing changes in the portrait and becomes concerned for his friend's well-being. Basil decides to confront Dorian about his behavior, urging him to change his ways and return to a virtuous life. However, Dorian is not receptive to Basil's pleas. He dismisses Basil's concerns, becoming angry and defensive. Dorian's bond with his portrait is too strong, and he is unwilling to acknowledge the darkness that has taken hold of his soul. In a pivotal moment, Dorian takes Basil to the attic and reveals a horrifying transformation that has occurred in the portrait. Basil is shocked and horrified by the grotesque image before him. He implores Dorian to repent for his sins and seek redemption, but Dorian's reaction is one of anger and denial. In a fit of rage and desperation, Dorian accuses Basil of being the cause of his misery and moral downfall. He takes a knife and, in a moment of madness, murders Basil in the attic. Dorian's actions drive him further into a world of secrecy and deception. He seeks the help of an acquaintance named Alan Campbell, a chemist with a dark secret of his own. Dorian forces Alan to assist him in disposing of Basil's body, and the two of them engage in a sinister cover-up. As Chapter 4 unfolds, Dorian's life is marked by a growing sense of isolation and torment. His outward appearance remains untouched by time, but he is haunted by the weight of his actions. He grapples with guilt and fear, knowing that his life has taken a deeply tragic turn. Chapter 4 is a turning point in the novel, as Dorian's descent into darkness becomes all-encompassing. His murder of Basil marks a pivotal moment in the story, and the consequences of this act will reverberate throughout the chapters that follow, leading to further moral and psychological turmoil. In Chapter 5, the consequences of Dorian Gray's actions continue to unravel as he grapples with the guilt and fear that have come to define his life. His once charmed existence becomes increasingly fraught with darkness and isolation. After the murder of Basil Hallward in the attic, Dorian's world is turned upside down. He is consumed by the weight of his terrible deed and the knowledge that he has forever altered the course of his life. Dorian's relationship with Lord Henry also begins to fray. He realizes that Lord Henry's influence has been a destructive force in his life, leading him down a path of moral degradation. He seeks to distance himself from Lord Henry, understanding the corrupting power of his philosophy. Dorian's obsession with his portrait in the attic intensifies. He becomes fixated on the fact that the portrait, rather than himself, now bears the marks of his sins and moral decay. It serves as a haunting reminder of his true nature. Dorian's descent into guilt and despair is palpable. He tries to reform himself and make amends for his past actions, but the weight of his conscience is overwhelming. The portrait continues to deteriorate, reflecting the ongoing consequences of his choices. As he grapples with his inner demons, Dorian's life takes on an air of secrecy and isolation. He withdraws from society, avoiding his former friends and acquaintances. His reputation as a charming and handsome young man remains intact, but he becomes increasingly reclusive. Dorian's growing sense of isolation is compounded by his realization that he is forever tied to the portrait. He is haunted by the belief that as long as the portrait exists, his true nature is exposed. He becomes desperate to hide it away, to protect the world from the knowledge of his sins. Chapter 5 delves deep into Dorian Gray's internal struggle. As he grapples with the consequences of his actions, his guilt and fear are palpable, and his desire for redemption clashes with his understanding of the inescapable darkness within him. As the portrait continues to reflect his moral decay, the tension in the story escalates, setting the stage for further revelations in the chapters ahead. In Chapter 6, the story of Dorian Gray takes a dark and dramatic turn. Dorian, tormented by the terrible reflection of his sins in the portrait hidden away in his attic, reaches a breaking point. Overwhelmed by guilt and despair, he can no longer bear the weight of his double life. The portrait, which serves as a horrifying mirror of his moral decay, becomes a symbol of his torment. In a moment of extreme emotion, Dorian decides to confront the painting, filled with rage and desperation. He stabs the portrait with a knife. This impulsive act is his undoing. Dorian's life comes to a tragic end, and he dies in the attic, the scene of his most profound inner conflict. But as Dorian breathes his last, a remarkable transformation takes place. The portrait in the attic undergoes a miraculous restoration, returning to its original state. It once again bears the marks of Dorian's sinful life, capturing the true essence of his moral decay. This climactic moment in the story is a powerful reminder of the novel's central themes. It underscores the idea that one cannot escape the consequences of their actions, and it serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of vanity and the pursuit of beauty without regard for morality. The restoration of the portrait to its original state, in the wake of Dorian's tragic end, highlights the inextricable connection between his soul and the artwork. It's a thought-provoking and intense conclusion to this chapter, setting the stage for the story's resolution in the chapters to come.